In the previous video, we've seen how to create a dungeon using an existing theme file. And now in this video, we'll be creating a theme file by ourselves from scratch. Now in your content browser, right click and choose dungeon theme. And double click on the asset to open up the theme editor. So here's where you define your theme. This is the graph node-based system where you can drag drop your meshes and link them up. And this is another content browser so that you can just drag drop assets from your content browser onto the graph. This is a live 3D viewport that shows you how the dungeon would look like when it's built. And these are the details. So let's start by adding a ground asset. Now we don't have any sample assets to work with, so let's use the sample content that comes with the plugin. So go to View Options, Show Plugin Content. Now navigate down to Dungeon Architect Content and go to Samples, go to DA Candy Meshes. So here we have some modular assets to work with. So we have a ground mesh. Go ahead, drag drop the ground mesh and then link it up with the ground node, with the ground marker. And you already see our dungeon is shaping up. So these named nodes, they are called marker nodes. And when the dungeon is built internally in the memory, it's going to populate the entire scene with these points called markers. So wherever there is a ground marker, it would place this mesh over here. So let's add in a wall to the wall marker. So when the dungeon was built, it has populated it with the wall markers here, and then whatever you specify below this, it will be replaced over here. Likewise, we will add in a door, and let's put in a fence as well. Let's put in a wall separator. So any mesh that you drop here, you could go ahead and modify its transformation and adjust the location, rotation, scale as per your liking. So we want to make this pillar a little bit thicker. So let's change this to 1.2. Let's turn off the lock so that there is no even scaling. I'll bring this back to 1.05 perhaps. So this is how you do it. You just drag drop and link them together. Now if you look at the wall meshes, we have two wall meshes, and there's another wall with a window in it, and we'd like to use it so that sometimes some of the walls have windows. So to do that, go ahead and drop in the wall mesh before the existing wall mesh. So that is to the left of the existing wall mesh, and then link it together. And as soon as you do that, you see that every wall has been replaced with the window version. The reason for that is that when Dungeon Architect executes the nodes below a certain marker, it would start from left to right, and it'll start executing it one by one from left to right. Now here there's a number that shows you the execution index. So this has been updated to 1 and this has been updated to 2. So if I were to move this around, now you see that this is now 1, this is 2. So when it starts executing it, it might either select the mesh or it might not select the mesh. So if the mesh is selected, it would insert it onto the scene and the execution stops there. So this mesh was selected and the execution has stopped, so it never came to the next node. And that is why everything is here you see it has a windowed wall in it. So there are multiple ways of controlling this selection process, and the easiest one being the probability variable. So a probability of 1 signifies that it would be selected 100% of the time. A probability of 0 would imply that it's selected 0% of the time. So this will never get selected. The execution moves on to the next node and this gets selected. However, if you change this to 0.5, then it gets selected 50% of the time. So first time it comes to this node and say it gets selected, the execution stops here, say for this one. However, for sometimes it might not get selected, right? And in that case it would move on to the next node, and the probability for this is 1, so this gets inserted instead. So this is how you can have multiple meshes in the scene. Now there is another mesh here. There's a photo frame that we like to add to all the walls. So drag and drop the photo frame and place it before these two nodes and then link them up. Now you see that all of our walls have disappeared and they've been replaced with the photo frame. And we don't want that. We want the photo frame to be inserted and we want the execution to continue further despite the fact that this has been selected. So for that we have a flag called consume on attach. And if we uncheck this, then the execution will proceed further regardless of whether this node was selected or not. So now we do have it. So let's go ahead and adjust the transform so that our photo frames are facing inwards and in the correct position. So select the photo frame node and modify the transformation. Set the location to location y to -22 and height to 200. And our photo frame is here, but it's facing the other way, so let's rotate it along C by 180 degrees. So we have our photo frame aligned properly. However, we have a problem. We have the photo frames also showing up where there are windows, and we want this decoration only to show up when the solid wall has been selected. We don't want it to show up when we have a window. So how do we do this? So for this we have a feature called marker emitter. So all these names that you see here, the ground marker, wall marker, fence, all of these were created by the dungeon building algorithm, and you can go ahead and create your own and extend this further. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new marker, add marker node, and call it, name it appropriately, say my wall deco. And I can go ahead and emit this marker from any of the selected nodes. So I want my wall decorations to show up only when a solid wall has been selected by the theme engine. So I can go ahead and emit a marker. I want to emit my wall decoration marker. So whenever this wall has been inserted onto the scene, it would go ahead and emit this marker, which would in turn execute everything underneath this. So I'm going to go ahead and deselect it from there and put it over here, and you see it just shows up where we have solid wall. So you can go ahead and add more decorative items underneath this. So let's go ahead and do that. Maybe we want a chair here. And you know, maybe we want this to show up only 70% of the time, not all the time. So similarly, let's go ahead and add window decorations. So we have a curtain we'd like to use on this. So quickly go ahead and add a new marker node and emit that from here. This window is facing outside, so let's rotate it by 180. This curtain is facing outside. Alright, so this is good. We can also place in a, let's say, a flower pot, for example. Now this flower pot is not showing up because when the curtain was selected, this never gets executed. We want both of them to show up, so select the curtain and uncheck consume and attach. Alright, so let's bring the flower pot up a bit. 150. Select the flower pot, 150. 160. Scale this down to 0.5. So this allows you to create some really powerful hierarchies to decorate your dungeon. When you start designing your themes, you need to make sure that your meshes align properly with the dungeon's boundaries. And you do that by going to properties and toggle debug data and make sure that the ground mesh properly aligns. So you'd want to first align the ground mesh correctly and then use that as a point of reference for aligning the walls and the fence. Sometimes, now in this case, the ground mesh here, and if I show the pivot, it's in the center. But sometimes some art assets, they use the pivot in the corner, so you can easily go ahead and adjust it from the offset. However, you have to first align it correctly. So to give you a quick example, let me create a new theme and let me drop in the starter content architecture floor. Now this one has its pivot in the corner, not in the center. So if I go and toggle debug data, you see that this is not aligned correctly. So to fix that, just select this and apply a offset of 200 or minus 200 and minus 200. And when that looks good, you can then go ahead and align the walls and the meshes. So if this is not aligned, your ground mesh is not aligned, then the rest of the stuff will not align either. So you might get alignment issues with the walls and fence. They just don't line up. So you have to make sure that your ground tile first lines up and then go with the rest.